imagine you'd still keep a weather log today. He received degrees in meteorology and broadcasting from St. Cloud State University. While studying meteorology, Pete, you began to forecast for a private weather company called Weather-Eye Inc. And then after graduation, joined an outfit called Cavoris, which provided forecasts for places around the world. Pete joined the Minnesota DNR, Minnesota State Climatology Office in 1998, and now you're one of the operational climatologists handling many of the data requests that arrive at the office, similar to what we were talking about earlier in the meeting around things like ice out and so forth, snowfall depth, all sorts of things. Pete's also the statewide coordinator of various volunteer rain gauge networks, and still keeps a weather log to this day for watching the weather. So please welcome Pete Boulay.
Great to have you. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Bob. Okay. I better figure out how to set up this, run the PowerPoint somehow here. Might need some assistance from oh, it's on here somewhere, or I have it too, if you want me to. I have it on a thumb drive. Yes. I'll have to grab my coat though. Where did I put my coat? No, I hung up. My coat went somewhere else. I'll get my coat and then we'll get the PowerPoint here. Now, this is my mom's favorite restaurant, so I can't wait to tell her I was at Rudy Red Eyes. Yeah. She'll be very jealous. Yes. Rudy's Red Eye Grill. That's my mom's favorite restaurant.
Make sure to document it.
Yes, that's right. She knows it's... That's good. It's being recorded, so thank you. All right. Well, I'm going to give you the microphone for a minute.
And I want to apologize too to Ellen and Tim, who both sent in guesses at last year's ice out as well. So not to me. So Paul Kelleher, our program coordinator.
Okay. That might be a better way to do it. This one might be old. So if you got it, it's probably the more updated. Oh,
yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Always. Well, who do I know here? Frank, Frank Watson, been a friend. Oh, I better stand so I get, the people on Zoom, right? Yeah, hi, people on Zoom. So with our office, the Watsons have been really involved with the climate office since day one. We save everything. We're kind of climate hoarders. And Frank's dad, Bruce, was a big friend of the office from day one. And we still have rain gauge readers that Frank's dad recruited by going door to door. Right, Frank? You want to be a rain gauge reader? You do, right? So it's almost like that. So Ramsey County used to have the biggest rain gauge network in the state. It was 450 observers in this county, and we still have a lot in this county. So that's one thing we do. And the ice out, that is our number one viewed, wanted product in our office, hands down. It's amazing the interest of ice out. And when do you think people are most interested in ice out? What? Now, but let's go forward. If it hasn't gone out in another 3 weeks, then they're really interested in it. Yes. I mean, it's like, when is it going out? That people get scared, and so I'm hoping this year will not be like that. I know it's starting out on a bad foot. We're a little behind. We have no ice out yet in the state, as far as I know. So, any luck? Do we have it, or maybe I'll have to, I guess I could try the old one. Let's see. I'll try.
Why don't you hold the mic? I'll give this to Dave.
Yeah. There's a couple of them on there, so hopefully it's the otherwise I have it on the web too. I could, yeah, let's see. I better, it should be that one. And now we're going to uncharted territory. I have no idea what's on here now. So we'll find out together here. Oh, good. That's a good sign. Yeah. If it said the Lions Club, we're in big trouble. So, okay, there we go. Always have backups, right? All right, well, there we go. I love old maps. Old map of White Bear Lake. This is on the city's website, so I just borrowed it from the city. Okay, weather, past, present, and future. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what has happened in the past, what's going on right now, and what could happen in the future. Do I have a way to control it, or do I? Next screen, please. I like it. All right. So here's our very modern looking website. Yes, it's flashy. If you went to our website about 25 years ago, it looks just like this. So my goal with the web is give as much data as possible, as easy as possible. So it's not fancy, and I get a lot of flack for it. Let me tell you, like, why do you have a 1990s website? I go, well, my goal is to give data, as much data as I can. And there's a lot on this website. Frank can attest to it. You can get lost in it forever. So there's the web link on there. You could Google Minnesota State Climatology Office. And before the National Weather Service had a web presence, we had one. And if you Googled Minnesota climate, we were the #1 hit for years and years, which is great. So we were the only game in town. So our website is so old, they published a book called The Whole Internet. I'm not kidding. There's a book about this thick, and our website was in the whole internet, the whole world. So there was only like 20 websites for Minnesota in there at the time. So that's how old our website is. It's so old. Okay, next slide. So, trivia question. So I'm part of the, I was past president of Maplewood Area Historical Society and the commission down there in Maplewood. And everybody's seen this, right? If you've ever driven on White Bear Avenue, if you ever gone to the county fair, this is the Poor Farm, and the Poor Farm barns are still there. So, kind of a fun bit of trivia. Residents of the Ramsey County Poor Farm were given a plot of land to plant whatever crop they wanted. What was the crop they chose? See if anybody can guess. Potatoes. That's what they hoped they'd plant. That's the #1 answer that the matron of the Poor Farm hoped they plant. They did not plant potatoes. All right, see if we can guess. Any corn? No. Well, that would have been good. Tomatoes. No. Nope. Think, huh? What would have been hard to get? Not cheap. Even back then. Oranges. All right, next slide. Not oranges. Tobacco, of course, right? They were not happy. The people running the Poor Farm said, thanks. Yeah, no. So anyway, I thought that was hilarious that that's what they picked. And they used to grow tobacco here in Minnesota, not a big crop, but, they used to make cigars in Minneapolis. It was, the climate in the 1920s was the right conditions. You could grow tobacco, couldn't compete with the South at all. And you don't hear much about it anymore. Wisconsin was a bigger cultivator than we were here. But anyway, next slide. I always thought that was kind of nice. All right. Well, here's a picture of my house and one of the, I don't even know which storm this is anymore. The long winter. We kind of had the long winter. Not quite Little House, criteria, but the long winter of 2022-23. So we'll go over a little bit of history. We were super wet. Then when we have our drought, some climate trends, current conditions, and what's future. And if you have any questions about anything, just raise your hand and I'll do what I can to answer. Next slide. Okay, the 2010s was the wettest decade on record for Minnesota. And there is some detail there. This is the maps we put together in our office using volunteer rain gauge readers, including anybody here besides Frank, a rain gauge reader? Nobody? Oh, a couple. For which network? But just for your own guy, we could sign you up, Yes. So anyway, there's about 1,500 rain gauges in the state that went into that map. That's why you could see that detail. There's a lot of nuances. It varies a lot in a county, as you can see. So anyway, during this decade, we accumulated about 40 to 65 inches of extra moisture in the 2010s. The big exception was the beginning of the 2010s. We had a pretty good drought in 2012 that affected lakes and everything else. So that was the start of it. But then it got super wet after that. Next slide. So there's me standing. I made a bet. Where was the talk? About 2010, we gave a talk in White Bear Lake. And I said at the talk, one day I'll be standing in the outlet of White Bear Lake again, flowing out of the lake. And then it took 9 years, but I did. There's the outlet. That's the North Beach. What do they call it? North Beach. Standing there by the old, that's the old pump house when they used to pump water into the lake. So it was very cold, but I had to do it. I got to get my picture. So it's not flowing out right now. But anyway, ice out. Yes. Yes. It was pretty cold. That's like I said, my feet are a little cold, but I had to do it. But yeah, that was 2019. So super wet, really wet, wettest year on record for the state. Then here comes 2020 and a drought. Now what's funny is this was a very dry year, 2020, but most people weren't affected a lot by it because of that wet 2019. We had a lot of moisture stored in the soil to be used up by the plants. So it wasn't as bad as it could have been. But overall, it was a dry year across the state. So that's year number one. Next slide. 2021, dry year number two, and it got even worse. So up in northwest Minnesota was the epicenter of the drought, the worst drought we've seen since the 87 through 89 drought in the state. Next slide. And there's where it was the worst. It was bad down here. You know, this is from the U.S. Drought Monitor. Anybody ever hear of that? Every week we put input in this U.S. Drought Monitor for the country. There's people like our office all throughout the country, and we go back and forth and talk about, you know, what's going on with the state. Yesterday I was right here in Renville County in Hector, and I was watching the water flow off the fields into the ditches. So the drought is basically over in Hector. And they're in moderate drought. So it's kind of neat to see what's going on the field. So the peak of the drought was August in 2021. That's Pelican Rapids. Things are drying up. Next slide. 2022. This is an interesting year. Last year, we still had a drought, but it shifted south. It came closer to home is what it did. So, you know, this is basically this was year 3 around here of being below normal. And you can see how much it varies. Not everybody was really below normal. You know, you go up northeast Minnesota, they had a wet year. Southeast Minnesota is like, what are you talking about? We're staying wet. Southeast Minnesota is escaping all the drought. Next slide. So the peak of the 2022 drought was November, and this is the worst it got. So we had extreme drought here for the first time in the metro since the 87 to 89 drought. So it was pretty much the worst drought we've seen here since the late 80s. The bad thing about this drought is it was really hard on trees. You might have heard about the oak trees having trouble. It's when these year over year droughts, it starts to add up. That's an oak tree right on Larpenteur Avenue at the U of M golf course. And I don't know how old it is. It's an old tree, but it's gone. It won't be there this year. They'll probably have to take it down. So we saw that a lot. Anybody have ash trees in their yard? Ash trees? Is it dead yet? Not yet? It's coming. Unless you treat it. Ash trees took a huge hit. And you saw it this last snow, they started falling. So if I had my updated, I'd have a picture of a fallen ash tree and the drought makes it worse. So I'm going to tie that into critters too with the weather. You know, critters can survive our winters better than they used to, including emerald ash borer. Next slide. So this is a focus on that extreme drought. And next slide, just to show, there it is. So we really had the driest June through October on record in that whole area. So the drought, the second drought from last year happened at the worst time it could, because that's usually when we get our most moisture. So it was the driest we've seen. So here we are last fall. Oh, we're in big trouble in 2023. We're going into winter, which we usually don't get a lot of precip, right? And we have this horrific drought, and we're thinking this is going to be the worst year ever, because here it comes, and we're looking at all the history, and well, once in a while, winter can bail you out. Once in a while. Next slide. So this is where we're at right now. So what happened was we had wet November, wet December, wet January, wet February, wet March, and I'm thinking we're going to have a wet April. So month over month over month, it keeps eroding away at the drought. And the next drought monitor is out tomorrow. We might even see it less than this. You know, I was right here, and they're definitely not in moderate drought anymore. So we've pulled away the drought. The really wet winter, it's rare to have a winter pull a drought out this much. So we were helped by the wet winter, and we didn't have deep frost. So the water's going in the ground. So that helps out too. Next slide. So we basically had 4 to 8 inches of precipitation throughout this whole, anywhere you see blue and green since early December. So we were totally bailed out of the drought. Actually, there was probably, as much of a pain this winter was, it was probably the best thing that happened to the state, because lakes are going up, rivers are going up, the ground moisture is replenished, and we don't have something we saw in 87 through 89 where we have year and year building a drought. So we're getting a break. Well, how long will it last? I don't know. But not everybody got bailed out. We are concerned up here. Our eyes are starting to turn back to the Northwest, which wasn't really as wet this winter. Drought's always part of our climate. We always got to be looking at it. Next slide. This is a kind of a messy map. They try to get a picture of what the soil moisture looks like from satellites. And it's tricky because the satellite's looking down through the snowpack into the ground and trying to get some assessment of dryness. Now, there's some things to look at here, and you might have heard they might have had a little precip in California lately. Yes, it's showing up, but there's an interesting connection from California to here we don't always see. It does happen, but we are getting part of the Pineapple Express here, and that's part of the reason why we're getting bailed out. Notice how the area where the drought's really bad, Nebraska, Kansas, they have a longer way to go. They had a much deeper drought than we had here. Next slide. So what is our trends in all this? Twin Cities. So we always try to steer people, so snowplow. Anybody get their have a snowplow service? They do? Do you agree with how much they charge? Any snowplowers in the audience? I got to play both sides, It's great when they call, the snowplower and the snowplowee call, and I tell them all, you go to this, the Twin Cities official observing site for snow, because that's what all the TV people use. That's the main snow reporting site. It's not perfect, far from perfect, but it's what we got. And millions of dollars of contracts in snow plowing rely on that tiny little can and a little whiteboard that you can't really see in the snow there. So that's it. And this is the Twin Cities office over time. This is downtown Minneapolis on the courthouse. Now, how would you like to go up there in the winter in downtown Minneapolis? And it's like 10 feet above the roof. So there's some guy well-dressed with his hat and everything. And then this is the 1940s on the Wold Chamberlain building, if you remember that, in the, now they call it Terminal 1. And I've been on that roof, and that's where they used to observe in the 1940s. And this is still there, basically where the tower is, in the shadow of the tower at the airport. So they still make the observations at the airport. So over time, this is the data we have, and you could say a lot about it. What about instrumentation placement and everything? But it's evolved over time. Next slide. So how is our climate changing? What's the trends? This is one of my favorite graphs. I compare the coldest winter temperature every year, because that's one we really remember. When was it the coldest, right? And downtown Minneapolis and the airport versus St. Cloud to compare. So what you see over time is that the Twin Cities doesn't get down to -30 anymore. St. Cloud doesn't get down to -40 anymore. So I was in St. Cloud for 2 of those -40s, and there's a big difference from -30 to -40. You will not drive your car at -40. You just give up. So it's cold, but notice over time we've had a trend going up. It's not consistent. There's a lot of variability in there. We had 1996, February 2nd. Last time we were really cold in the state, like super cold. And that's some on the lower dots there. But every year I put another dot on there. I think this year was one of the warmest, coldest winters. So we had minus 13, I think. Is that right, Frank? Oh my goodness, right. Correct me, Frank. Is that about right? About minus 13. That's not cold. Minus 13. I mean, when I used to buy my cars, I'd always insist on a block heater underneath, as part of the negotiation process, right? So, because you get down to minus 20, if you park your car outside, you want to plug it in, right? Well, don't have to worry about it as much anymore here. All right, next slide. So this is what we're seeing over time. The real difference we're seeing is overnight minimum temperatures in the winter. Quick answer. That's the biggest change we're seeing. This is a map, and it's warming faster as you go farther north. So International Falls, they call themselves the ice box of the nation. They're not what they used to be either. They still get cold. They get colder than us, but they don't get as cold. So the summer, we're not seeing as big of a difference. And that's, even in the South, it's even a little bit cooler. I could have an entire another presentation on why it might be colder in southern Minnesota. It has something to do with possibly corn and soybeans, but that's another atmospheric moisture in dew point and everything. So, but anyway, across the state, overall, we're warming about 1.9 degrees to 3.4 degrees, depending where you live. Next. So somebody's saying, okay, fine, Pete. You can't really use statistics for the Twin Cities. We have a heat island, right? So that always affects our temperature over time. How about somewhere where there's not a heat island? We found that somewhere. This is Milan, not Milan, Minnesota, in Chippewa County. And they've had that kind of that little white box you saw in the other picture. They've had the same equipment for 125 years. They still use a liquid and glass mercury thermometer and an alcohol thermometer for the minimum, because mercury freezes at minus 40. So you got to have something colder. So they're using that same temperature, same place. They moved once from a little north of downtown to a little farther out, but it's the same. I went there and looked at it, same basic terrain. Next slide. This is what it looks like. This is their farm. No heat island in Milan. So we love to use this as kind of a nice, station, because they're very dedicated readers. I don't know if they ever really miss a day. So next slide. So we use this data to show what's going on over time. Here's the lowest lows of each winter at Milan. It's from 1895 to 2018. So we took all the coldest and the averages and the coldest in winter, and any way you slice it, it's a slow march upward. Now, I gave an ag talk when I was in Hector yesterday. I told them that, I showed them this slide. I go, it's not all bad news. And these guys, it was 125 farmers from Renville County, and it was a seed promotion. It was put on by a seed company. And I go, the flip side is we now have a longer growing season from about 120 days to 150 days. We've gained a growing season too. So there's good and bad with all this stuff. And I'll refer back to the growing season too. Next slide. So what is the consequence of losing extreme cold? We have a longer growing season. You can grow more corn. You could, I had the best, I have to say I had the best pepper growing in the last 3 years I've ever had. I never could grow peppers. I always had a hard time. But last 3 years, they're great because we had kind of a warmer conditions and drier. So I didn't know anything about these 20 years ago, I would say maybe 25 years ago. These are Japanese beetles. Anybody have ever battled these in your garden? Yeah, good luck, right? Not fun. So anyway, this is Japanese beetles on Virginia creeper at Keller Lake in 2017, one of the bad years. They arrived in New Jersey. Thank you, New Jersey, for bringing them to us. And then they gradually spread across the country and showed up in Minnesota in 1968. Iowa in 94. I don't know why it took so long to get there. Next slide. So the lethal soil temperature for the grubs, and this is actually the sneaky part of these guys. They eat your grass, turf grass. That's how they start. And but they can't survive 15 degrees. And we have not had 15 degrees in the soil in a while. I have a soil temperature probes at the U of M St. Paul campus. And we've been around 32 degrees now for a couple of years. We never really have gotten that cold. So these guys can live through that, but they also don't like drought. They need nice grass to live in. So if your lawn isn't in good shape, they're not going to be happy. So what's the deal with these guys? Next slide. So in 2019, here's where they were. And they're a bigger problem in other states. We don't have the biggest problem. In Missouri, they're a big problem. There's more of them, and they go after corn and soybeans. And corn, they go after the tassels, eat the tassels. Nice of them. For us, they eat my beans and my raspberries. So 2019 was one of the bad years. Next slide. Over time, here's the spread to 2022. So what's happening is they can survive our winters. They spread north. So we don't get as cold, and now they just keep spreading. So, there's all kinds of pests like this out there, in the ag world. You wouldn't believe how many things want to eat corn, and everything. Well, in your garden, right? You plant something, potatoes, what's going to happen? Potato bugs, right? There's always something to attack your stuff. So this is something we're going to have to live with. And emerald ash borer is similar. They have a lethal temperature too. And, even buckthorn. Anybody have buckthorn? The lethal temperature of buckthorn, I think, is -40. So if we can get down -40, we could get rid of that buckthorn problem we've had. So all those plants and animals have lethal temperatures. That's why, you think of the USDA growing, zones, we're like zone 4B, I think. Are we going to be a 5? The people that sell plants want us to be a 5 because now you can grow more stuff here, right? Than you used to. But, there's some consequences there. Kenny Blumenfeld is the senior climatologist in our office. He's our climate change focal, and he's worried about kudzu getting here. So that's something we do not have in the state, but they do in southern states. They can survive mild winters, and I'm not looking forward to that day. I'm hoping a long time from now. Anyway, next slide. Oh, I did put it in there. There's my emerald ash borer tree. This is right at that's Prosperity and Larpener. Oh, another fun trivia. Prosperity Avenue. Where did it dead end back in the olden days? At the poor farm. Yep. Come to the end of Prosperity, you're at the poor farm. Yep. So anyway, that's a tree that's being attacked by emerald ash borers. So we're going to see if you're in the tree removal business. I think this year you're going to be looking pretty good. You're going to have a lot of work. All right, next slide. So, White Bear Lake. We got to do a little bit of White Bear Lake. So this is data right from our website. Anybody can grab this data. This is White Bear Lake annual precipitation. I took a 5-year moving average. And there's the web link on there. If this is saved, online, people could copy that link and go right to that page where I got the data. So, a lot of interesting things in there. 1910 is right here, driest year we ever had. And I'm trying to think what the wettest year is. It's hard to see in an angle, but we've had a couple of them in recent years. And then you can see the last 3 years really have that down check there. Next slide. So this is White Bear Lake water levels over time. A lot of history here. There's a lot you could talk about. In this era, of course, pumping, 42 feet extra was added to the lake. The outflow has been changed over time. 1982 was the last time it was changed, and where I was standing. And then you can see the droughts show up. 88 drought, and then there's some one-hit wonder droughts like 1976 shows up, and then the dry early 2000s and 2012. And then our 2019, the real wet, where it was flowing out again, flows out at about somewhere now about in here. And now the last 3 years it went down. Now I looked at it yesterday and the lake's back up. I don't know by how much because there's ice on it, but it's going back up. Sometimes in the winter, White Bear Lake still goes down. So, it's interesting. It's going up, and I've asked a lot of people, and their lakes are going up too. So we'll see where it winds up when the ice goes off. Next slide. So what about the future? What's going to happen in the future here? So next slide. So good news. And this is why I wanted to ask that. I wasn't sure which slides I had on here because I started putting these together a week ago. It still looked like we're going to be cold. And this storm that we just got looked like we would have got about 1.5 inches of liquid, maybe even snow. And it all kept shifting north, north, north. And I think it's a real bad ice storm right now in Pine County right now. So it's close to us, but all we got was a few thunderstorms out of it so far. I think we're about done. Anyway, next week, different weather. So we had our first 50 of the year. Was it on Sunday? So we should have our first 60 of the year coming in the next few days, and the next 70 of the year next week. And the forecast for Tuesday right now is 75 degrees. Hard to believe, isn't it? So the good news is this is our outlook 8 to 14 days, April 11 through 17. Finally, spring, right? And not wetter than normal for once. It's near normal. So I guess we still could get something. So that's good news. Our cold and wet spell might be over. We're not quite sure beyond this. Gets a little fuzzy after 8 to 14 days. Next slide. This is all from the Climate Prediction Center, and their track record isn't always great, just to let you know. You can sometimes take the exact opposite of what they outlook is, and you might be just as right. So this is what they were saying, and this is getting old now. They did this on March 16. This is April, May, and June. So looking at this, you're saying below normal, and that's partly because up here, the winter is still alive and well up there right now. So they're probably just hedging their bets on that. Snow isn't melting up in Grand Forks for a while. So yeah, April will be below normal up there. So I think that's more of that. I wouldn't necessarily say the whole state will be below normal. It's interesting. They do say above normal precipitation too. So we've been looking into this too, is how long will this wet pattern last? It started in November and it's still going on now. We had a couple weeks off. In February, we're dried out a little bit, but overall it's been very wet. And next slide. So drought outlook through June 30. So this is an interesting map too. Basically, it says we'll be free of drought by June 30. So they expect, the Climate Prediction Center expects the drought to be gone. And this is an interesting, here's our Pineapple Express. Notice how there's this improvement going this direction. So that's part of what's going on. Now, this is the real interesting part is Nebraska maybe losing their drought. They have a lot worse than we do. I got to stop moving around. Those poor people at home are probably getting seasick from me running around in front of the camera here. So good news, not just for us, but North, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, improving the drought. That'd be great because it's been a long drought for them. Next slide. So what about July through September? A three-sided coin, basically. Yeah, we don't know. Equal chances, we'll call it. Could be above, below, or normal. Interesting that most of the country is, yeah, that's a good way to forecast, right? Could be anything. Above normal for most of the country, though, which is interesting. I don't know how we would stay below normal if the entire country is above normal, but not sure. We'll see. Next slide. So in summary, the 2010s, extraordinary wet. Our dryness really began in 2020. We had 3 years in a row of below normal precip. Will 2023 be below normal or above normal? I don't know. So far, we're way above normal. So we've been wet so far. So we were in a La Nina winter this past winter. It was a classic La Nina winter like the olden days, lots of snow and pretty good cold. And we're going away. La Nina's going away. We're going to have an El Nino winter, possibly this coming winter, which would be above normal temperatures and maybe not as much precip, not as much snow. So that's what's possibly in the cards for us. And if I had that Climate Prediction Center map, they have above normal for the winter next winter. So maybe we'll have a warmer winter. So the bottom line is, even though the trend is for a warmer and wetter climate, expect variability. We will have droughts. We always do in Minnesota. And sometimes they're hard to predict. So thanks. And any questions? Got that Manitou Island there a little bit. It was much more of an island back then. Look at that bridge. That's a big bridge. Any questions?
Thanks so much, Pete.
Oh,
yeah.
Questions? I'll stay in front of the camera.
Hey, when you mentioned the soil temperature,
Yes.
not getting below 32. Is that below the frost line? Are you talking about, or?
So what happened like this year, we had very little frost. We had maybe around here about 5 inches of frost, and it was soft frost. I mean, it was like you still could punch a pull through it. So that's right at the top. Down below, it stayed in the 30s and 40s below that. So we were actually melting our snow from underneath much of the winter because it was still warm. Yeah.
What is your prediction for White Bear Lake ice out?
Ice out. I kind of like April 20. Sounds about right. About a week late. That's where we're running right now. So I would say April 20. So I think it'll be in April. Is that good? That'd be about 99% of the right most of the time, April.
Based on all the precip this winter, what's your prediction for White Bear Lake level?
Oh
this summer?
boy. I'm not really a hydrologist, but so like with ice out, it doesn't really matter how thick the ice is. It matters what happens in April, really, for anywhere in the state or up north, maybe. But with White Bear Lake, it all depends on if we stay wet. And we looked at a couple of years where the winters have been active and then where the summer's active. 1983 is one of them. 1997 is one of them. So there's been some proxy of if you have a wet, stormy winter, you can have a wet, stormy summer. 1965 is another one. And we had some pretty good tornadoes in 65. So that's in the cards. And if that happens, yeah, it'd be good for raising the lake. If another drought, we had 3 years in a row below normal, it'll keep going down. So we'll have to see. I don't know. I wish I had a good crystal ball. It's a little cloudy.
Pete, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Can you explain why, or maybe generally why our winters are warming? We're losing all these winter days, like you talked about extended spring seasons, growing seasons. Why our winters are warming faster than our summers are warming?
Yep. Good question. Because we are losing, it's funny. Over time, we're losing our continuous snow cover pack, except this year. What happens is if you don't have snow reflects radiation very well, solar radiation into the sky. And at night we get colder with the snow cover, nice white snow cover. So over time, we've lost our deep snowpack, and that makes us colder if we have deep snow. If we don't have snow like right now, it's going to stay warmer because we're losing our snowpack. So the less snow on the ground, the warmer you get. Right there, you take the edge off winter, and that's why it changes that much. Yep, warm is faster. Yeah.
You with the recent tornadoes down in Iowa and Illinois, do you see that moving northward? The amount?
And we're very keen on that. We actually had kind of a tornado drought across the country for the last couple of years. Last year started getting busier, but we had really almost very few tornadoes across the country. So we've had a lot so far this year, and yeah, it could shift north. It would fit the pattern of other years that we've seen. 83 was a big stormy year with tornadoes and kind of winter like this. So yeah, it could happen. I mean, so far it's getting close, Iowa. So it's almost like there's a magic line at the board. We have not had a tornado in Minnesota yet this year, as far as I know. I don't know about last night, but yeah, it could. That's possible. We are certainly starting out active. Yeah.
Any other questions in the room?
Oh, how about online, I suppose, too, right?
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Online people.
Nope.
I saw Jan there. I see Jan. I hope you're watching the lake, Jan. She's talking. I can hear her.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we are.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's because of people like Jan we can pull off the ice out. There's no way. People think we in the DNR are driving around to all the lakes for ice out. No. I have 5 lakes I look at. That's enough. But they're in my neighborhood, so it's easy. But Jan, thank you, Jan. Thank you. Because people ask all the time, is the ice out yet? Is the ice out yet? And I'm like, talk to Jan.
Yeah. We have our source in Jan.
Yes.
But it's like your rain gauge keepers, all this
Yes.
historical data. If you didn't have citizen
Oh, yes.
Minnesota residents.
Citizen
involved.
scientists make our office.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Pete,
Oh.
thank you so much for your perspective. Interesting to hear the trends and the work that you do. Clearly, you've got a lot of work on your hands going forward. And just really fascinating. On behalf of our club, here's an honorary white bear.
I love it.